Welcome to our Hear From Her series where we speak with outstanding women leaders and achievers in Singapore. We are glad to have Nichol with us today. She is the Group CEO of X Inc., that is the parent company of subsidiaries in the food industry. Nichol is also a mother of 4 and co-founder of the Food Bank Singapore, a business that collects food donations from several players, including farms and supermarkets, and redistributes them to those in need. On top of that, she's also the president of One Singapore, an organization that seeks to alleviate poverty and raise awareness of issues such as climate change, inequality, and discrimination. Thank you, Nichol, for being here with us today. Maybe we can start with a little sharing about your personal journey in the food industry, how the Food Bank Singapore came about, and One Singapore's initiatives.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. This is my 21st year in the food distribution business, but our family has been around for close to 90 years in terms of operations. So throughout it all, we've been doing food distribution, food sales, wholesale trade, and all that as well. At this juncture, I've always been very open about my family's business ups and downs. So in the 97 Asian currency crisis, we actually went bankrupt where we lost like 39 of the 40 companies. And so the only business that my dad could really ring fence was the small food distribution business that my grandfather started in 1934. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that it doesn't mean that, third generation business owners have always gotten it easy, because there was no succession plan. And instead, 2002, my dad actually requested for me to come back to the business because they had to digitize the business. It was really very manual. And so I came in on the purpose of computerizing everything to a debt-laden company, really. After entering the trade, then I realized that, hey, actually we have a lot more that we can do, since we work with other fellow traders, wholesalers, importers, all very traditional businesses. And one of the things that we have seen was the obscene level of food that's being dumped, not just at the supermarket level, but actually at the traders level as well. So, a lot of stuff that even before it reaches consumers, we have seen like stockpiles of items in warehouses, for example. For some reason, maybe there's no offtake or, expiry date issues or cosmetic issues, products are being thrown away. So I spent a good first 10 years of my career helping to stabilize the family business. And then me and my brother, we decided that if we had an opportunity to scale back the business to a certain size, that we would want to give back. Therefore, in 2012, the Food Bank was born. The idea was very simple, was just to motivate our peers in the food industry to be able to say, hey, don't dump the food, but instead donate it and give it a new lease of life. So food banking is not new in the world. It's been around since 1950s. But our first obstacle was actually registering the NGO with ACRA, because we're a CLG. And the interesting joke of it all was that the officer told us that there are no more banking licenses in Singapore. And this is a true story. So they rejected the name because, you cannot be a OCBC or a POSB, for example. So we really had to spend 2 months populating all the global information of what food banking stands for. Currently, we are already running our 11th year of operations. We have a strong board as well, a tight-knit group of us. We oversee a team of about 15 to 16 full-timers. A lot of them are young people. We actually serve a network of close to 370 charity organizations. Actually, at the peak in the year 2020, we redistributed 1,600 tons of food. So we also came up with Singapore's first National Hunger Report, 2020. So we're looking at 10.4% of people that goes through states of food insecurity at some point in the month. So the food bank has grown strength to strength, and it has become like an active 5th, 6th subsidiary of ours. So we spend a lot of time despite not drawing an income from there, but it's been a meaningful journey. And then One Singapore, I started out as a volunteer, really. We had a side project. And then till today, we have a very small group of EXCO members who are also full-time volunteering in the role. The interesting thing about One Singapore was that they were there before Singapore was allowed to use the word poverty in a lot of the media and the presses. So the founders were pressing the buttons in terms of advocacy towards equality. And I think at this point, Shu, it will be interesting to note that Singapore is a first world country that still does not have an obvious minimum wage or a poverty line. This is where One Singapore continues to be relevant till today, because we're still championing for equality in a city that seems like you should be able to have equal opportunities everywhere.
Thanks, Nichol, for sharing your journey. And it's amazing to hear the work you have done with your organizations and how you overcame the challenges that you faced while juggling so many roles. So you spoke about food waste and food insecurity. And we know that food waste is one of the biggest waste streams in Singapore that accounts for over 10% of total waste generated in the country. Food insecurity in Singapore is also a concern. So what more do you think needs to be done in Singapore to reduce food waste and food insecurity?
So I think from a food waste perspective, in Singapore, there's very little that we can do if the government doesn't put in some ring fence, right? So for example, in about a year's time, it would be kind of illegal to dump organic waste at all shopping malls. So they will be penalized, there'll be a fine that will be if you have excess amount of food waste. So I think they're putting some legislation around it. But one of the very prickly issues that I've raised in fact, with SFA before was that Singapore is a free port and there's no import taxes levied on consumables, right? So other than, alcohol and cars and blah, 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 everything else that we consume is zero tax. So therefore, a lot of people has been importing a lot of stuff relatively freely and relatively cheaper. So what happens is when you have that, right, you don't control the quantity of food you can import. So what SFA does is they control where you can import, but they don't control the volumes that you should be importing. So like in other countries where they have agriculture backgrounds and things like that, they will tend to then curb the quantity that you can import to protect the local farmers. So, but in Singapore, we don't have that because we wanted to ensure that we have sufficient, right? So, but in today's day and age where we throw away 30% of, most of the stuff that we import, maybe it's time to really look at restricting certain quantities instead of just giving free play. So this is one. Then the other thing which I feel we're a clean and green city. And so our incineration is also top class in the world, right? We have one of the most efficient incineration. So, and therefore there's this problem where more people would choose to incinerate products than to think of giving it a new lease of life because it's cheap, affordable, clean, and you get a cert and you can show people that, okay, I've dumped this, properly already and things like that. But maybe we should not make it as convenient, as affordable, and as easy for people to throw away. But instead, think of that. And then the other thing which I would challenge the status quo really is the expiry dates. I think till today, the education around, especially even with NGOs and charities, right, they still require like 3 months from expiry date, then I can use the product. Because you give me something with 3 weeks, the quality is not so good. So there is this preconceived notion that something that's very close to expiry dates or use by dates, it's really not good when actually it's not exactly the truth. So I think it's a lot of educating and changing people's mindset without putting people's health at risk. So food safety is still very important. Food security to me is beyond food. In Singapore, if you want to get help, very easy to get help. Plenty of organizations dishing out food. But is it the right type of food? Does it put students through school throughout the day? Are we feeding them the correct products? And the other thing about food insecurity, which I will also mention here, is that I think there's a lack of collaboration between the NGOs. And so sometimes lack of communication mean that some subsections of people get double help or triple help. And some actually are underserved. So therefore, you also get food waste that you see gets elevated, right, when it's food distribution time. I mean, recently the media has been picking up all these stories, the uncle's having 30 bags of rice and he doesn't cook, and things like that. And in today's world, and I think in 2023, it's even more applicable than ever before with this stagflation that we are really seeing, or this inflation, right? It's a prolonged inflation. And I can honestly tell you from a food business perspective, we're not expecting numbers or figures to come down anytime soon in terms of pricing. So that means every dollar, every donation dollar, right, we need to be mindful about how we spend it, what we spend it on, and we also need to ensure that there is minimal waste once it's being distributed. So for example, like there's a lot of Meals on Wheels program, but are we cooking food that's healthy, cooking food that is good for the people who are receiving it? And is it something that they want to consume? And because a lot of the packets of food is also being dumped. So, there's a lot of things that I guess as NGOs or even as business people, we really need to step up and make our voices heard, because I must say in today's age, the government doesn't have all the answers. And for people who know and are walking the ground, we should speak up when we know about it. And there shouldn't be a fear in speaking up.
Thanks. I think those are really interesting perspectives, especially on the policy and legislation level and changing mindsets on expiry dates while still maintaining high food quality. So looking ahead into the future, what are some of the key sustainability trends we can anticipate for the food industry in Singapore? And what are your hopes for the future in this space?
So if I may just declare, right, I've never been a sustainability champion. And neither has the food bank. We didn't set up to be like, oh, we're going to be a green champion, because we're not. We're not a dumpster diver. We're not a food rescuer. We just happen to be in this correct space at the correct time. I think sustainability has been an overused word in the sense that it become like it's part of like, okay, it's something that you should be shouting about. But if you go back like 90 years, like during my grandfather's time, and this is a story that I've repeated before, right? Like sustainability equals survival. Because like for him, right, even if there's 2 green bean drop on the floor, you would pick it up because you'll be able to sell that, right? I mean, you wouldn't think of like, okay, like diu diao or just throw away, right? It's not like that. So I think in today's world where we have a buy and dump kind of a mentality, or things have become so cheap and affordable to everybody, you don't think twice about throwing it away, especially in Singapore's context. And I think until the recent 18 months where everybody's feeling the pinch, especially on the cost of living, people still have the tendency to like, okay, it's okay, we buy a little bit more because it's affordable. So what I'm hoping to do is, number one, sustainability. There are many, many tracks. As people living in this tiny island with this 5-6 million over of us, we should begin to ask like, where does our food comes from? And not just asking for cheap food. Because now everyone is complaining, oh, food is expensive, but can you actually have some concern on the source of food? So when you start asking the source of food, then maybe you would want to, if you want to support local, then maybe the restaurants will also uptake or more local produce as well. Because I think there's been a lot of support for the local farms, but there's not enough uptake in terms of sales at the F&B level. So, but as consumers, what we can do is that we can start asking ourselves, right, where does our fish comes from? Where does our prawn comes from? Has it traveled like, don't know how many billion miles, right, to reach our plate? So we need to be responsible consumers. And when we start asking questions, then we start to be more mindful about it. And I must say, as much as maybe 5-8 years ago, sustainability was just a sexy buzzword, really now sustainability is a matter of the next generation's survival. If we do not take note of this topic as sensitively as we should, maybe my children won't have affordable food to eat. And it's in the very near future that we're going to face that already. If I may just end this little recording with some thoughts, right, is that Singapore doesn't stand alone on this topic. We're just a tiny red dot in this huge, huge world. We must remember that while we're such an affluent country, we have the money to buy a lot of things and we can import from many, many countries, but still we are one of the smallest customers that anybody wants to supply to, which means that we will always be getting the shorter end of the stick. And even if I have money, I'll be paying more money for that same product. So, and the other thing is, maybe a lot of people listening in would be like, either you have clients for investing or whatever else, right? In this particular space, you might be asking yourself, is it worthwhile investing in agri-tech? My own opinion, 90% of the agri-tech startups will fail. But what they are doing is they are paving the way for the next generation of giants to come along. So just like how computerization came in the 50s and 60s, it was all laid up on a bunch of failures, right? On everything that people have learned. So if we can come together to learn, to share, I think agri-tech is a space that everyone needs to focus on because it will be the survivability to the future sustainability of the world.
Thank you so much, Nichol, for taking the time to join us today and sharing with us your personal journey, as well as giving us great insights into the food industry and trends to look forward to in this space, such as agri-tech. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot from this chat and hopefully be encouraged to think about their journey of their food and how they can reduce waste as responsible consumers.